Well, hello, Aleyda. This is so amazing to have you on our podcast. We are so excited. We know that this topic is going to be super valuable for our families to hear. And we know that you are an absolute expert in this field. We're so excited to have you here. So, yeah, we're happy to have you here. And we just are wanting to welcome you here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is my first podcast, believe it or not. So
Wow.
I'm very excited to be here. And I
Yes.
always love talking to families. It's what I grew up doing, and I'll explain as we go along.
Yes. So
Oh,
good.
yeah, we definitely appreciate you here because this can be a subject that's pretty hard to navigate. So we really appreciate, kind of going into the details here. But before we get started kind of in the SSI kind of world of things, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into this?
Okay, yeah. So currently I teach at Cornell's Yang Institute, the Work Incentive Support Center. So I'm part of the WISC team there. We're a small team, but what we do there is we teach a credential course for people who want to work as work incentives planners. So people go through our course to get a credential and provide work incentives planning. And they usually work for an organization, usually nonprofits. And so, yeah, so I work there now, and I actually live in San Diego and teach remotely, but I do travel. We have to travel for our work. We sometimes have to do trainings in person, or a team meets. But yeah, so I've been working there. But prior to that, I was working at Disability Rights California. And
Mhm.
I worked there for over 20 years. And I mean, I loved working there. My favorite part of that job was working with the community, really,
Yeah.
is working with parents, working with students, everybody in between, right? All the counselors and teachers and everybody who helps folks, to help folks make that transition, to work, from benefits to work.
Yes.
One of the things that, as you're mentioning this, is there kind of a national now like credential program for what you're doing and how you're helping families? So I know you have a teaching course. Is it kind of like, well, I'm a teacher, so we have credentials. So I was wondering, is this kind of similar to that?
Similar in that, so yeah, so there's, I mean, sort of to just the big landscape, there used to be a lot of universities that did this. And it's narrowed down now to two big organizations. Cornell is the one, we provide that credential course, but it's not similar in the sense that you're not required to have an undergrad degree to do the credential program.
Yeah.
And then Virginia Commonwealth University is the other one, and they provide a certificate program, but they're contracted by Social Security to provide that service to people who are contracted with the WIPAs. With Social Security contracts with WIPAs to provide work incentives counseling in the community. And
Okay.
so VCU really does all that training. So anybody who's not working within the WIPA contract can choose to go to Cornell and sign up for our course and take the course. And there's a process that they have to follow. There's a webinar series that they have to go through, an exam that they have to go through, and a practicum. And very similar to what VCU does as well. They do I've been through that training course because I worked at DRC. I was the WIPA manager there. So I've been through that training. So they're very similar in that sense, in that there's a course, an exam, and a practicum.
Hmm.
So good.
That's great.
Again, we're just so happy you're here because you do have all of this experience. It's incredible. And it's such a valuable topic for our families to hear more about. What was your path to starting that career in teaching this course, this benefits planning at Cornell?
I honestly, like, what I've been doing the last 20 years has basically prepared me for this job. So I started working as a client's rights advocate at the Inland Regional Center.
Yes.
And at the time, it was the largest regional center in terms of population and folks that were clients of that regional center. And so I was just, my title was client's rights advocate, and folks would call us with just about any service issue they were having. They could be calling us about special education, Medicaid, which is, Medi-Cal in California, Social Security. And I really began to understand everything that they were navigating. And I was just, I was overwhelmed, because I'm this newbie thinking like, oh my gosh, you're dealing with what? So honestly, like working in the community, I got to understand a lot of those issues and help people with those issues. I took on meetings and hearings and representation to help folks. And I learned a lot actually from my clients. You know, they were the ones that would come to me with issues, but I would learn little things from them. I remember this one time I was working with this mom, and she kept saying to me as we were working together, she kept mentioning, she's like, yes, my son is my roommate. We live together, but he's my roommate. And I thought, okay, you know, at the time I was so, you know, young and new, I didn't really understand what she meant by that. But later, as I got to understand programs and, you know, helping her, she was trying to make the point that he's on SSI and he pays rent and we're roommates. We live together. And there was a point to all of that.
Mhm.
And so I always remember her because, you know, it was these little tidbits of things that I would learn from people, and I could understand like what they're learning and what they've been told and how they're communicating that to make sure that, you know, everything is in place the way that they, you know, somebody gave them advice about, you know?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
we do know. We do know.
yeah, very much so. There's a
And
lot to navigate.
oh my goodness, right? And
Yeah.
just the
Anxiety.
language, yes, causes tremendous anxiety.
Yes.
And just the language, knowing the language. Love that you brought up clients' rights and advocacy. So often we highlight that to families, that resource, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're in the community, you know, fielding the calls, talking to clients, and eventually, you know, I would also present to parent groups and at different festivals and fiestas and
Mhm.
things like that that parents put on. And they're such a valuable resource in the community because it's a way for families to learn. And you know, now that we have podcasts, like here 20 years later, I used to go to these events, and now I'm on a podcast. So
Mhm.
it's really evolved. But the point is that, you know, I was out in the community working with folks, but a lot of the questions were about, well, you know, I want to go to work. That's where it started. You know, I had clients who would come to me, it's like, well, I want to go to work. What's going to happen to my benefits? Or I'm going to work and I don't know what to do. Where do I start?
Mhm.
And so I was sort of navigating that and trying to understand that. Eventually, I focused on beneficiaries who were on Social Security returning to work. And at first, it was helping them navigate, how do I ask for an accommodation? Or maybe they were preparing to go to work and they were getting, you know, they were going through a testing process, a credential process. You know, how do I request an accommodation, you know, when I'm testing? And then it became more about benefits and implementing work incentives. So, you know, people would ask, well, I submitted this impairment related work expense I have, but Social Security didn't do anything with it. What do I do? So I sort of started with the problems before I understood really the rules.
Mhm.
Really, because I was presented with the problems, and then I had to do some research and figure out, like, why is this not an impairment related work expense? Why is Social Security not counting it as an impairment related work expense? And of course, I'll get into a little bit more detail about that. But, you know, it's just really trying to figure out why people were having problems, really, with implementing some of these work incentives, when I started realizing that, oh, wow, there's a whole field out there of people who do work incentives counseling. So the 1999 Ticket to Work legislation allowed Social Security to fund experts in the communities. And there were these WIPA projects, right? Work incentives planning and assistance.
Mm.
And so that's where we would refer people to in the beginning. We would find the local WIPA, the local benefits counselor, and direct people to make sure that they got benefits counseling. So that's how I became familiar with WIPA. And eventually what happened was that I ran a WIPA project in 3 counties. So that was sort of my transition. I went from like helping clients, figuring things out, finding resources for them, and then eventually becoming a WIPA, a work incentives planner in the
Amazing.
community.
That's so great, you
Amazing.
know, because working with Social Security, it is a very difficult system to navigate, and there's a lot of misconceptions, misunderstandings. I know, like, can you work? Can you not? When are they going to take it off? And quite frankly, I'm so glad that you know you're out there educating people, because they're not incredibly helpful in terms of navigating this course. Uh, can you kind of go through some of the things? Because I know a lot of people think they can't work with SSI. Some of the misunderstandings about SSI and work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are a lot of myths out there and a lot of misinformation. And part of that is because everyone's benefits package is different. So if I'm on a certain benefit and I ask you a question, we might not be talking about the same benefit. And we don't know that, right? We don't know each other's benefits unless we're checking our bank accounts and verifying information.
Yep.
There's a lot of misinformation that's shared. So I think that's sometimes what happens. And, it's a good thing for people to communicate and ask questions, but they need to make sure that they're talking to folks who can give them some solid information so that they can make the right choice for themselves, right? But yeah, so a lot of the information is, well, don't work because then you'll lose your benefits, right? If don't work, or, you'll lose your health care.
Right.
So individualized information is really important so that we can make sure that folks are getting the right information and not creating more myths about going to work.
That is so good.
Yeah. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And so, part of my job is to make sure that folks know the right information, right? To make sure that they are giving the right information. So with SSI specifically, and we're going to talk about SSI specifically, I think, in this podcast, there are work incentives that allow people to make that transition to work. So there are work incentives that allow people to keep some benefits while they're making that transition. If you guys are you guys all ready to get into those details?
Absolutely.
Oh,
We'd love it. We would love it. This is what it's all about.
Okay. Well, so for students, since we're, I think we wanted to focus on students, for those folks who are on SSI and their students are ages 18 to 22, there is actually something called the student earned income exclusion. And basically, it allows someone to work and just exclude up to $2,290 a month of income so that there's no impact to the SSI benefit.
Okay.
And the reason behind the rule, if you think about it, it's to encourage young people to work, right? Working is a good thing. Like, you remember when you were in high school and you had your first job, like I was so excited to work at Jack in the Box. My son, I suggested he go and apply it In and Out. And he's like, I don't want to work at a fast food. I'm like, why? It's so much fun. You get to meet people, talk to people, free food.
Absolutely.
So the rationale is really to encourage young people to work without that fear that they're going to lose benefits.
Yeah.
So most kids, are working part-time, summer hours, maybe seasonal hours. They're really not going to see much change in their SSI benefits because of this exclusion. Now, if they're going to be working for longer periods of time, then they definitely want to get some benefits counseling, because they might max out that SEIE, right? They may earn either above that, or they'll use it so much that the yearly SEIE will be exhausted. So the yearly SEIE is $9,230.
Okay.
So they really do need to have some counseling to make sure that they're either using the SEIE, what they're using monthly, so they know what they're using monthly and when they might exhaust that. But really, a part-time minimum wage job, they'll probably be good to use the SEIE for most of the year. If not, for sure, they'll use it in the summer. And then guess what? The next year, the number usually increases. So if they have a different job, there'll be a different SEIE amount. It increases each year.
Yes. Okay. And again, can you repeat what SEIE was?
The student earned income exclusion.
Yes. And that's for 18 to 22-year-olds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, and does you mentioned it going up each year. Is it based on an individual and what they earned the previous year, or is it a cost of living adjustment, or, what is that amount changing by? Like what influences?
Yeah. So the SEIE increases each year, the monthly amount, the yearly amount, because of cost of living adjustments. It's going to go up, but it goes up for everybody. So the maximum will be applied in the same amount to everybody.
Well, and I would add to this conversation, we talked about myths that get passed around and things like that. This is relatively new. I mean, we're old school. 99, we got married in 98, right? So this is relatively new, this ticket to work. And am I saying that correctly? Would we be seeing this correctly? I mean, it's something that families definitely need to know. They need to know as their kids are getting older, and we're in this generation. So, but yeah, bravo to this.
Yeah, so let me clarify something. So this work incentive applies to anybody who would qualify as a student, right?
Yes.
And there's there's a definition of who a student is. And so you're looking at someone between the ages of 18 to 22. They're either in high school, they're in a college, university, but they have to be a student regardless. So the ticket to work is a separate provision.
Got it.
And that's the ticket to work legislation did a lot of things. This is a legislation that was signed into law back in 1999 by then President Bill Clinton. And in this, this basically allows employment networks to exist. And that's basically how people get services to go back to work. So if they need services from VR, from vocational rehabilitation, or an employment network, they can go and get those services. And the Ticket to Work program has funding to help people get those services because Social Security will pay for those services. So employment services could be job leads, resume prep, job coaching, things like that, right? This rule, SEIE, applies to any person who qualifies and is working. So you don't have to be using a ticket to take advantage of this rule.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That works just for students, and yet so a student is defined basically. The transition is also defined as a student, correct? Because I know you mentioned college, high school, so forth like that. But
Yeah, so they have to be in a course that's preparing them for employment for at least 15 hours a week.
Okay.
So yeah, so most of those students who are in that transition now and that transition age youth group, they're usually taking courses or preparing to go to work, right? Those are mostly what those transition courses are for. So again, it's important to get benefits counseling because you want to make sure you meet that student definition and make sure that you're, you can connect the rule and apply it and make sure that Social Security knows you're a student. Sometimes Social Security misses that the person is a student. And so then they don't apply the SEIE. So I think that, when I was right before I transitioned to working at Cornell, I actually was working with a lot of counselors who were in the high schools that were working with transition age youth, very aware of this rule now. I think a long time ago, there weren't counselors that were aware of the rule, and there weren't counselors working with transition age youth who were transitioning to work. So that made my job a lot easier. We would meet with the student, make sure we understood what they were, what courses they were taking, what services they were getting, how much they were earning, would they be able to apply to get the SEIE, and what did they need to provide to Social Security to make sure that that SEIE was being applied correctly.
Yeah.
So just to take a little work to make sure that it should be applied and that it is being applied by Social Security so that there's no deduction. Essentially what happens is if the person is able to use the SEIE, the SSI, you won't see any changes in that SSI benefit and that cash monthly benefit.
Yes. Good. So important.
Well, and so
Yeah.
these sound like terrific programs for somebody who's 18 to 22. As somebody, ages out of the education system into, say, like our daughter would be going into a day program and so forth, what kind of programs are there when they age out of the education system?
So, there's the vocational rehabilitation and the regional centers can work together to make a person's goal a reality, right? If a person has the goal of employment, what is that? What steps are going to be needed to get there, right? That I want to be a teacher, I want to work with students, I want to work at a coffee shop, whatever that goal may be, right? It could be going to college as well, right? So there are services out there that help people make that transition. I had clients who were getting services, but started off receiving job coaching services. So they needed someone to help them understand how to do that job and help them do that job. And so eventually what happens is that they're great at their job and they don't need that job coach, right? Some students may need long-term job coaching. So VR can provide job coaching services, but if it's going to be long-term job coaching services, then the regional center is a resource for that.
So good.
Yeah, the employment networks are smaller organizations, smaller nonprofits that provide very individualized services. And they're mostly helping people, from what I've seen, with helping them find a job. So they're helping with interview, resume prep, job leads, and things like that. So if the person needs VR, regional center, EN, it really is going to depend on that particular person's goal and, you know, what they're going to need. The ENs have a smaller pot of money to work with to provide services. So I think their services are a little bit not as expansive, I think, as VR and regional center working together.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. That spells it out a little bit more
Yeah,
for sure.
and I think you're talking about two different things here too at the same time. So I
Yeah.
think maybe some clarity. You're talking about services that are going to help somebody work, which is something provided
Mhm.
by the state, and then we're also talking about what they get from working, the type of income, and how that might
Right.
affect the SSI.
Right.
So just making a clarifying point, you're saying that there's different like funding and so forth like that to help people who have disabilities to work in the workforce, to prepare them
Right.
for it, for the things that they're going to need, the skills that they're going to do it. But then also there's the other side of it. If they actually are working, they're making an income that they're going to be, that possibly can affect the SSI as well. Correct. So
Right.
these different categories. Yeah.
Yeah, so once people start working to have that paycheck,
Mhm.
then if they're on SSI, they may see a reduction of their benefits. But there are a lot of things that are disregarded. So the first $20 are disregarded, assuming the person only has SSI and now they have earnings. The first 20 are disregarded, the next 65 are disregarded, and even 50% of what is left is disregarded or excluded. So if you've seen those calculations, that's one of the things that benefits counselors do is help people understand, given the earning goal you have or the earnings that you're going to have, you're going to see this is what your SSI is going to look like, right? So if the student doesn't have the SEIE to use, or they've aged out of that SEIE, that's what these disregards or exclusions, this is where they're going to apply the 20, the 65, and the 50%. But there are also other disregards. So if a person has something called impairment related work expenses, they'll take that into consideration. So some things that are impairment related are expenses related to maybe a service animal, right?
Mhm.
So I might be spending $100 on my service animal. It's related to my disability, helps me with my seizures or my anxiety, right? As long as there's a connection there with the disability, then that could, and you know, if this is something that's helping me get up every day to go to work or helping me calm down
Right.
at night when I come back from work with my anxiety, you know, that connection is there, then it could be an impairment related work expense. And that $100 now is deducted from those earnings that I have to disregard those earnings. So not only do I get the regular disregards, but now I have an additional $100 that would be disregarded from my income because I have this expense.
Yeah.
So it sounds like
Yeah.
it's very similar, kind of like to write-offs for any kind of business person. If you
Right.
have expenses that are related to your business, uh, preparing you for work, things, tools that you need to actually prepare you to be, all those things can be written off the income.
As it should be.
Yeah. So
And that's a great analogy. You know, it's so funny. I've never thought of it that way. But if you think of yourself as your own little business, that's a
Mhm.
great way to think about it.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's an expense that I need in order to be able to go to work and it's related to my disability. You know, why not? You know, Social Security will say, yeah, they should say yes. Hey, it's an expense. It's related to your disability. We're going to count it and we'll count. So in effect, what it does is there's a more countable income that's excluded for that
Mhm.
calculation, right?
Yes.
And
And there's
transportation is something included?
it could be actually, yeah, there's some hoops to jump with transportation. You have to be able to show that there's no public transportation.
Mhm.
And then after that, if there's no public transportation and it's related to the disability, there might be some connection that you might have to make there.
Mhm.
But I've had clients who just couldn't learn a bus route,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so they would have to take alternative transportation.
Right.
There's people who didn't have, I had a client who the walk between where he lived and the bus stop, he couldn't do that walk.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember exactly the reason, but so we, you know, so then we said, let's, what's the alternative transportation? And so there was a friend who could take him. And so we asked for the transportation to and from that he paid for that friend to be an impairment related work expense. So yes, transportation can be, again, getting some benefits counseling to make sure that you can use this as an IRWE is really important, or just understanding the rule to make sure that you covered all your bases.
Yeah.
For folks that are blind, there's even broader work incentive. They have something called blind work expenses. They're just more generous. They allow, everything that an IRWE would be, but there's additional like lunches. If they pay for lunch at work, they can count that as an impairment related, or as a blind work incentive, I should say.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more generous, and it's but very similar to impairment related work expenses.
Yeah. So again, just so important to get that more specific counseling, right? We're going to talk more about that. So good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I know. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to add one more. One of my favorite
Yeah.
work incentives is PASS, Plan to Achieve Self-Sufficiency.
Oh, good.
And so the reason I like this is because this allows folks, maybe in even older folks. I had a lot of adults who use the PASS plan. And basically, SSI is limiting in this way as well, is that it has this $2,000 resource limit, right? You can't have more than $2,000 saved in your bank account. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yes.
But with a PASS plan, if you have an employment goal and you have a second source of income coming in, and you want to fund services or supports to reach that goal, you can do it through something called a PASS plan. It's an application. If it gets approved, then you're allowed to have that second source of income being saved or used for that employment goal without being penalized for that $2,000 resource limit. Okay. So if you had an inheritance or some money coming in, or you want to save more for that goal, then the PASS plan is one way to do it. But there's and we'll talk about other ways to save in that $2,000 resource limit.
Yeah, that's so good to know, really.
Yeah.
When we just have this question of can working people with disabilities work and still keep their Medi-Cal, right? Is there
Yeah. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions, right? If I work, I'll lose my Medicaid. In California, it's Medi-Cal.
Right.
There's a lot of different ways to keep Medi-Cal, and because we live in California, we have a lot of options. So in California, even $1 of SSI, I'm still going to keep my Medi-Cal, right? So even if I do work, I'm no longer have that SEIE, maybe I'm earning too much and the disregards leave my, I have no longer have SSI goes to zero. As long as I'm making less than what's called the 1619B threshold, I can still keep my Medi-Cal. So 1619B is a Social Security rule that allows people to stay on Medi-Cal even when their SSI goes to zero. The threshold is different in each state, and it's basically what does it cost for you to be able to pay for your Medi-Cal when you're working, and are you able to pay for healthcare? And so they come up with this number of what it costs each Medi-Cal person to have Medi-Cal for a year, right? So the number changes each year. So this year's threshold, if someone is making less than $58,638, but they have no SSI because they're working, then they'll be able to stay on SSI linked Medi-Cal through 1619B. So it's kind of like keeping the door ajar. I'm still on the SSI program. I'm not getting a cash benefit, but because I'm making less than this, I'm going to be able to keep Medi-Cal. Yeah. So that's one option, right? So again, a myth is if I go to work, I'm going to lose my Medi-Cal. That's not the case.
Right.
The other wonderful thing we have in California is the Medicaid buy-in, and it's called the 250% Working Disabled Medi-Cal program. And this is a great Medi-Cal program. So if you were to make more than the $58,638, then the Medicaid buy-in is another option. And what's great about California too is that this is supposed to be a seamless process. People come to go through one program and seamlessly are supposed to be transitioned into that program. And that's because we have the state, a Medi-Cal program working with the Social Security program to make sure that anybody who loses Medi-Cal because they no longer qualify through the SSI door, even through 1619B, then gets assessed by the county for any other Medi-Cal programs that are available to them, and Medicaid buy-in is one of them.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys have heard, but in California, we don't have any resource tests for Medicaid anymore, for Medi-Cal anymore.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay.
So that $2,000 limit that I had under SSI and 1619B, once I'm on that Medicaid buy-in or a Medicaid or Medi-Cal program,
Mhm.
that's not linked to SSI, I'm not stuck with that $2,000 resource anymore.
Ah, very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
So
good
the
to know.
yeah, so the Medicaid buy-in allows people to qualify if they have less than 250% of the FPL, but they do the same calculation they do with SSI. They have a lot of disregards. They disregard the first 20, the 65, the 50%.
Okay.
They'll also apply any impairment-related work expenses. And there used to be a premium, and it was there was a different premium amount depending on your income, but we got rid of the premium payments during COVID, which was a great thing. And
Okay.
for now, we're not paying premiums for the Medicaid buy-in, so that's great.
Yeah. And you
So-
mentioned for now.
Yeah.
For now,
Pass it
that
on.
could change.
Right. But go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things that actually came up personally for us is, can you clarify, is there two different Medi-Cal programs before you're 18 and then after you're 18? And how does that transition work?
Great question. So there is a transition for 18-year-olds, right? So when you're 18, let's say before you turn 18, they're looking at household income. So they're looking at the parents' income, how many people are in the household, how many kids are there. And that's all going to be, those are all facts that are going to determine whether someone's eligible for SSI and how much they're eligible for SSI. So a lot of kids under the age of 18 may not qualify for SSI because of the household income, right? Once they turn 18, then they're looking at just the adult's income. So just that 18-year-old's income, right? And so are they looking at the income and whether they also pay for rent, right? And those facts are going to determine the amount of SSA that person gets. So now if the person under 18 didn't qualify for SSI, then they're not going to be linked to Medi-Cal through the SSI program, but they could still be eligible for Medi-Cal, right? They could still have Medi-Cal eligibility either because and this is through the waiver program through the regional center, right?
Right.
So once they turn 18, then they'll let's say if they did qualify for SSI, they do a redetermination. That means that they do an age 18 redetermination to determine if the person is eligible as an adult based on the adult standard of disability. And if they do, then they transition into an adult and they look at their income, their household, and what they're paying in terms of rent that determines the amount. If they were never on SSI, all right, and Medi-Cal continues, if they were never on SSI and they turn 18, then they might be eligible for Medi-Cal for the very first time linked to SSI.
Interesting.
Does that make sense? I mean, it's like a flow chart. Like you have to really put this in a flow chart.
Yes.
Yeah, but there's different ways. If you think of Medi-Cal as sort of the house, there's different rooms in that house. There's the SSI house, $1 of SSI links you to Medi-Cal through the SSI program. There's 1619B. If you don't qualify for an SSI cash benefit, that's the other room, 1619B. If you don't qualify for that, there's the Medicaid buy-in program. So that's a different room. And because we're in California, we've expanded Medicaid through the Affordable Care Act. So there's a lot more houses. We also have the waiver program, right? For folks to qualify if they don't qualify through the SSI program. And so we have just a whole bunch of ways to qualify for Medi-Cal in California and for healthcare in general in California. So I hope that's clear because I know it is
great.
And is it pretty much an automated system? If you're qualified for SSI, you are in Medi-Cal system, or is there an application process too?
No, good question. Because some states you do have to do that, but not in California. In California, again, you qualify for at least $1 of SSI, you're qualified for Medi-Cal.
And you're in the program.
You're in the program, right? And that's why people, are so scared to lose cash eligibility because they know that, well, I have SSI, I'm going to lose my Medi-Cal.
Right.
Again, that's not the case.
Yeah, misconceptions.
Yep.
Yes. I could see your wheels spinning.
I know, seriously.
Oh, you know
Just-
what?
again, you're just doing such a
There's-
great job of like practically delineating every section of this. I mean, this is just something that our families are often hearing, misinformation about and are trying so desperately to figure out. And
Mhm.
so it's just so great,
Yeah.
that it's so clearly presented.
Yeah. And let me tell you, it takes a while to really understand this stuff because it's sort of, again, it's like a flow chart you kind of have to figure out in your head. So if I go here and I go there,
Ah.
this, it's the game of life. It's like, well, if I go this path, what happens? If I go that path, what happens? Right. And so, but I think the bottom line is that if somebody wants to work, there's
Mhm.
no reason why they should not at least attempt to work.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, the worst case scenario is that they're not able to work that particular job. I had a lot of clients that I worked with when I eventually became a WIPA manager, and worked at benefits counseling. And I had clients who would attempt one job that didn't work out. That's okay. They went back, try to find services or help to get another job, and then they would try the next job. And eventually they found their footing. Right. And so I just think that for me, I always say to folks, working is a good thing. Yes, there's fear in working. Any first time job, anytime you go to work for the first time, anytime you change jobs, it's going to be challenging. It's going to be a new adventure, but it should be exciting as well, right? I remember I always try to think of my first job and how excited I was to earn a paycheck.
Yeah.
And I think like everyone should have that feeling. Everyone should always be proud of being able to earn a paycheck and work if they want to.
There you
That's
go.
such good
That's great.
advice.
Mhm.
Probably piggybacking on that, what is your advice for kind of the first steps for somebody wanting to get into work, wanting to make sure that it matches with their benefits and taking those steps to the getting in the work programs?
Yeah. So they definitely want to connect with a benefits counselor. So, when I started this so the Ticket to Work legislation was signed in 1999, and that's when the WIPA contract funding was available and there were WIPAs in the community. We've come such a long way that there's credentialed and certified benefits counselors just about everywhere now, right? So you have folks at VR that are credentialed to provide benefits counseling. There's folks at different nonprofits that provide employment services that are also credentialed to provide benefits counseling. Even some schools have benefits counselors on staff. So it's important to ask questions like, I want to go to work, but I want to know what's going to happen to my benefits. And you eventually will find the right person to talk to, because I know as a WIPA, I was always out in the community. And even now at Cornell, I'm still out in the community to make sure that people know there are certified and credentialed counselors out there for you to talk to and get information specific to your situation, specific to your benefits package that the benefits that you receive. So it's really important to just keep asking questions and get connected to the right people. For SSI folks, you're always going to want to, you're going to work with someone who's going to give you a calculation. This is how much you think you're going to earn. This is how much you're going to earn. Let's look at what that's going to look like for you. And let me teach you how to report to Social Security. There's so many different ways to report to Social Security. Benefits counselors also talk about that. Like, how do you think you want to report this? So, some people need a lot of help in the very beginning to sort of navigate all this, and then they eventually get the hang of it, right? But getting benefits counseling either through a credentialed or certified benefits counselor is really a good way to get started. And, listening to podcasts like this, and just listening and understanding information so that you can learn. Like, this shouldn't be so scary. As long as I keep, once you listen and hear things over and over again, you're like, oh, okay, I get that. I get that.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly why we do this, is just to allow families to learn the information that they're looking for, that they're in need of. And oh my goodness, just absolutely appreciate your expertise on this. One of the things that comes up for families is also these ABLE accounts. Can
Oh,
you talk a little bit about that and how does that play into this?
yeah. So, so again, SSI has this $2,000 resource limit. It's been around and it hasn't changed much since like the 70s. It hasn't kept pace with the reality of things, right? If I wanted to save for my first apartment, I need the first month's rent and either a security deposit or last month's rent, or sometimes even both, right? And $2,000 really isn't a very realistic for for my first apartment, right? Or if I want to save for a nice little used car, maybe I want a down payment on it, and $2,000 just doesn't really, cars are really expensive right now, especially used cars, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it hasn't, the ABLE accounts were created so that folks who are on SSI can save money, and they wouldn't be limited to that $2,000 resource. It's a special rule that says if you're a person with a disability under the age of 26, if you're diagnosed with a disability prior to the age of 26, we're going to allow you to open this ABLE account, and you can save up to $100,000 lifetime. And then each year you can save up to a certain amount. This year is $18,000. And you won't disqualify yourself from SSI. And what you save in there, you're going to be able to use for just about anything that's a qualified disability expense. And it's interpreted broadly. It could be for education. It could pay for housing. It could pay for healthcare, transportation, assistive technology, anything that really allows that person to live independently, right? And so that's what ABLE accounts are for. And so what's great about it is that the person can open the ABLE account, but anybody can put money in there. So if grandma wanted to put money in there for my birthday, mom and dad wanted to give me a graduation gift, it'll go into that account. And so it allows, to have money for an emergency if something happens in the future, or just to save for a big expense or big ticket price, like a car or maybe even a home in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is a game changer for folks to be able to dictate their future and to plan what they want to do for their future, right? If they want to save for a house or have money ready for any kind of emergency that might come up.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so California, doesn't have, again, I mentioned that California doesn't have a research limit for Medi-Cal anymore, which is great. So the SSI, is really, it's really the ABLE account really is for to be able to continue to have the SSI benefit as someone's on that SSI benefit and save.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And can SSI look at that and kind of make any assumptions on where that money came from? So
Good. Yeah, that's a great question. Can they save anything about that? No. So the only thing about paying for housing, it's a little tricky, but it's doable, is that a person can use the money to save to pay for rent, let's say, for example, right? So they pull it out in the month that they're going to pay for that housing, then they're good to go. If they keep that money in their account and they're over that $2,000 resource, let's say they put it into their checking account or savings account to write that check or to give that money to the landlord, and they keep it and they don't use it for that rent and it's there the next month, that's where there could be a problem. But Social Security now has really great resources on their website that talks about ABLE accounts. So yeah, no, they can't say anything about what you spent it on. So, but remember, SSI still has that $2,000 resource limit. So, for SSI, you can own a house as long as you live in it. You can own a car of any value. If you have a second car, they'll look at the value of that car. So there's a lot of resource exclusions in SSI. Right? So if you're still receiving SSI or connected to SSI, you're still going to have those limitations. So if a person works off of SSI, then they don't have to worry about those limitations. They still have an ABLE account. So if they come back to SSI, they have their ABLE account, they're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's real important. Like looking at it, you don't want to have money in there that's being spent, and they're saying, "Well, where's that money coming from? What's
No.
that income coming from?" So the Social Security doesn't have the ability to look at that and ask questions. Because I've seen the actual that they recognize if you have a CalAble account on reports, but they're not able to ask questions about that or determine that you have other income and therefore your SSI should be limited, or that they would take.
Right.
Yeah,
like, would a CalAble affect your SSI benefits at all? Right.
Yeah. So let me clarify that. So the work rules are the work rules. Those will still apply. What you do with the money after you've earned it, right? You can save it, but it's still going to impact that SSI check. So if you have money coming in from work, you're still going to have that calculation, the 20 disregard or the SEIE, the 65 disregard, etc. That's still going to happen. But then whatever money you have, just like you and I have a paycheck at the end of the day, I could save that money. I pay my bills, I save some of it. I could do that with money, but as long as I'm not over the $100,000 maximum resource limit, then I shouldn't have a problem with being eligible for SSI. So again, you're imagining someone who's still receiving an SSI check because maybe they're working part-time and still getting an SSI check. They're still going to have that $2,000 resource limit, but with an ABLE account, they can have the ABLE account and still have, no more than $2,000 in maybe that checking account they use each month where they pay their, monthly bills. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And even if somebody didn't work and there's money being put in there, so that kind of situation where there's money being put in an ABLE account. So, like you mentioned, gifts from grandparents or something like that, that money comes in as part of what they're spending. That's still not going to have anything to do with the SSI benefits.
Right. So if you're saving money in an ABLE account, you can't be questioned about where the money is coming from. It's in the ABLE account. That's all that, that really Social Security needs to know.
Yeah.
If it's earnings from work, then they may have questions like, oh, we didn't know you were working. We need to recalculate your benefits and see what SSI you're eligible for. That's still going to happen.
Right.
That doesn't go away.
No, totally.
And that makes sense for work. I mean, they're
Yeah.
tracking specifically work, but if money's coming in from other places that goes into your Cal ABLE account, that's not something that they have any, that's not tied to work or tied to reduction in benefits for SSI.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Super.
I just love that this topic has been really focused on the fact that, our individuals with disability, our family members, they deserve the right to work. They deserve that right to take pride and get a paycheck and not be docked for that, right? Not be penalized for that, but rather have a way forward to be able to do that. And in the end result, it's far more of a positive experience than to say, oh my goodness, they can't work at all. We're just going to do SSI and we're going to just, plow forward. So I love the tone of, then the purpose behind it. Exactly. This topic of conversation is so good. Aleyda, is there anything else before we get to our last question that you just, maybe think like we didn't cover this or, you want to explain more or whatever? Because this is, again, such a valuable topic. So
no, just, I think I covered everything. I think that for folks who want to use that SEIE, I'll tell you a story. I had a student who, he wasn't a student actually. He had just graduated from high school and he was working at a job he really didn't like. And I said to him, well, I mean, have you thought about, going to school? It's like, I don't know, he's really not, school wasn't something that he was really thinking about. He really was eager to go to work and earn his own paycheck.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let me talk to you about SEIE just so that you know all the rules. And if you were a student and working, you would have up to, explain the rule. If you take, if you register over at the community college and take, 2 courses, let's say you take 2 courses and you want to work part-time, the SEIE will exclude all your income in the month, based on what he was earning. And his eyes opened up. And he's like, wait a minute, what? And I said, yeah. So there's, it's, you just graduated from high school. And you could go, you'd be considered a student by SSI if you, just registered for, and I think we came up with like 2 courses in the, when I looked up the units. And he said, okay. So, he hadn't thought about that. And it was a way for him to say, okay, I want to work and earn money, but school can also be an option. And he didn't realize that. And sometimes people don't realize that. I had a young lady in my office who, she was really worried and, she wanted to take this job and she was going to be making good money, but I explained 1619B and she just started crying. She's like, I didn't know. I wish I had known. I was so worried. I didn't think that I could keep Medi-Cal and still have this job. It's such a great opportunity. And I said, yeah. And so we went over in detail what 1619B was and what her income was going to be. And, and she was just so grateful. And that's what I love about my job, is being able to share the good news with folks like, hey, how about this? How about that? And this is what this is going to look like, and do that, benefits counseling. And I could tell you, like, so many people are just always so relieved to know someone who knows the language, right? We talked about that in the beginning. It's like learning a different language, and parents and students and folks are always so happy to know that there's somebody who knows the language and can speak the language with them, right?
Yes.
So anyway, I just wanted to give you some of those anecdotes that
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
That's
that
so
just
great.
brings it to life, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things we always like to ask our guest is, as you're presenting your topic and your experience with this, is what is one thing you'd like to leave with our listeners that would bring hope for the road ahead?
Working is a good thing.
Mhm.
And everybody should have the ability to attempt to work if that is what they desire. I don't see why we can't make that happen for everybody.
Love it.
Well,
So good. Oh my goodness. Aleyda, really cannot thank you enough, because this is such a, frankly, murky subject for our families.
it's challenging.
And so again, just hearing the clarity on this topic is amazing. And you are just such a wonderful expert in this field. And so we are so blessed to have had you on this podcast today. And thank you again.